Beneath the steady hum of machinery and the rhythmic flow of water, Thomas Mitchell found solace in his role as the dam operator. For over a decade, he had dedicated himself to this formidable barrier that stood guard over the valley. With a rugged face weathered by time and experience, he embodied the spirit of resilience, yet his heart bore the weight of responsibility. Every dial he monitored and every lever he adjusted told a story of countless hours spent learning the intricate dance of the dam's mechanisms. Thomas had always been captivated by the engineering marvel before him. He took pride in knowing its every nuance, from the powerful turbines that harnessed river currents to the intricate floodgates designed to manage excess water. Each component was a familiar friend, whispering secrets of both safety and potential disaster. During his shifts, he immersed himself in the rhythmic sound of water flowing through spillways, finding comfort in its predictability, a stark contrast to the unpredictable nature of the world outside. Safety was his creed, an unwavering principle that guided him through calm and storm alike. He understood that a single miscalculation could spell catastrophe not just for the dam but for the entire valley below. His nightly rounds were more than routine, they were a ritual that honed his instincts. He listened to the dam, feeling its vibrancy pulse against the backdrop of a quiet night. But there was an unspoken tension lingering in the air, a foreboding sense that something extraordinary loomed just beyond the horizon. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden hues across the water's surface, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at the precipice of a storm unlike any he had ever faced. The clouds gathered ominously, heralding change, and with it, a sense of impending doom. Little did he know that this night would challenge everything he believed about control and fate. As night enveloped the valley, Thomas felt the first signs of change in the air. The stillness that typically blanketed the region was disrupted by a sudden gust of wind, carrying with it an unsettling chill. He stepped outside the control room, scanning the horizon as dark clouds swelled ominously above. What began as a gentle drizzle quickly intensified, morphing into a relentless downpour that slapped against the ground with ferocity. Thomas took a deep breath, bracing himself for what was to come. He knew from experience that this kind of weather could lead to trouble. However, the intensity of the rain was unusual even for this time of year. As he returned to his post, he monitored the National Weather Service updates on his computer screen. The forecasts warned of heavy rainfall and rising river levels, a disconcerting harbinger for both the dam and the valley it protected. Outside, the sound of water splattering violently against the pavement mixed with the distant rumble of thunder, sending a shiver down his spine. His heart raced as he initiated precautionary measures, increasing monitoring protocols and preparing to open additional floodgates should the situation worsen. Each droplet seemed to carry with it the weight of impending disaster, amplifying the tension in his gut. In the span of mere hours, what began as a normal evening had transformed into a chaotic symphony of nature's wrath. Streams turned into torrents, and rivers began to swell beyond their banks. Thomas could only watch as the landscape blurred under sheets of rain, with each flash of lightning illuminating the growing urgency of his task. He knew that time was running out. If this weather pattern continued unabated, the dam would soon face unprecedented challenges. With every passing minute, the reality of the situation settled in. A flood was not just possible, it was now inevitable. With the rain intensifying, Thomas had no time to waste. He returned to the control room where the stark glow of monitors illuminated his determined expression. Each screen flickered with data that detailed critical parameters, water levels, turbine speeds, and gate statuses. Experience had taught him that every second mattered when nature unleashed its fury. First, he checked the water level gauges, watching in horror as they steadily climbed toward the danger zone. In a swift motion, he adjusted the operational protocols, preparing to implement emergency measures. The dam's floodgates were designed for various scenarios, yet they were only effective if he acted promptly. His hands hovered over the controls as he mentally reviewed the manual, an outdated tome filled with instructions that had become instinct through years of dedication. Next, he engaged the alarm system, alerting his team to prepare for imminent action. With each pulsing siren, a sense of urgency filled the air. They were a well-trained crew, accustomed to collaborating under pressure. Even so, this storm was unlike anything they had encountered in years. As Thomas relayed updates and assignments to his colleagues via radio, he could feel their determination echoing through his headset. He focused on the gates now. Preparation was key. Slowly and methodically, Thomas initiated the process to open them partially, allowing excess water to escape without compromising structural integrity. Outside, torrents crashed against the dam's surface like wild horses galloping freely. Each surge was a reminder of nature's raw power and the responsibility resting on his shoulders. As Thomas surveyed the rising waters beyond the dam's edge, it became increasingly clear they needed to act decisively or risk losing everything they had worked tirelessly to protect. The reality of their situation settled heavily in his gut. The time for hesitation was over. They were on the brink of an unprecedented challenge. The relentless rain pounded the dam, creating a steady roar that seemed to drown out all thoughts except one: survival. As Thomas monitored the rising water levels, a wave of anxiety washed over him. The radio crackled to life, bringing alarming reports from nearby valleys. He listened intently as authorities detailed swift and dramatic increases in river levels upstream. Each update felt like a blow to his gut. "We're seeing surges into the tributaries," one voice announced, urgency lacing every word. "They believe it's getting close. We might have only hours before the overflow reaches us." Thomas tightened his grip on the control panel, his heart racing as he exchanged worried glances with his team. It was clear, if surrounding water bodies breached their banks, the dam would be forced to bear the brunt of the surge. He quickly glanced at the gauges again. They were inching dangerously close to critical levels. The floodgates, designed for effective drainage in manageable conditions, now felt woefully inadequate against nature's looming fury. He could envision torrents cascading down the mountainsides, merging into an unstoppable force surging toward them. "Prepare for additional floodgate openings," he commanded, his voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside him. But even as he issued orders, a gnawing doubt tugged at him. Would it be enough? As the minutes passed, the atmosphere grew charged with tension. Staff members moved about with grim determination, voices hushed as they shared uneasy estimates and contingency plans. Thomas's mind raced as he calculated probabilities and outcomes based on the reports flooding in. The possibility of failure loomed like a shadow in his thoughts. Through the haze of worry and urgency, one truth crystallized: they needed every ounce of resolve to withstand what lay ahead. Time was slipping away faster than he'd like to admit. The Hydra of chaos was approaching and showing no signs of mercy. As the storm raged outside, Thomas felt a tempest of emotions raging within him. Fear clawed at the edges of his mind, a familiar yet unwelcome companion that whispered doubts into his ear. He had faced challenges before, each incident etched into his memory as a reminder of the precarious balance between safety and disaster. In those moments, he often recalled the flood from a decade ago when a sudden surge nearly breached the dam's walls, claiming lives and altering his perception of control forever. Tonight was different, though. The stakes felt higher, the weight of responsibility heavier. He could almost hear the echoes of frantic voices from that fateful night, cries for help, shouts of alarm, and the overwhelming sound of water crashing against barriers. Each memory was a stark reminder of what failure could mean, not just for him, but for the families who relied on the dam's integrity. He inhaled deeply, trying to push aside the creeping dread. The faces of the community flashed in his mind: children playing by the riverbank, neighbors sharing laughter during summer picnics. They were counting on him to keep them safe. This thought ignited a flicker of resolve within him, transforming fear into determination. Thomas had dedicated his life to this dam. It was not just machinery, but a lifeline for many. With renewed focus, he shifted his gaze back to the monitors, resolute in his commitment to protect not only the dam but also those who called this valley home. He knew he had to be the anchor amidst this storm, guiding his team with strength and clarity. As anxiety and memories swirled around him, he leaned into his duty, reminding himself that courage wasn't the absence of fear but rather facing it head-on, armed with knowledge and unwavering resolve. The atmosphere in the control room shifted suddenly as a high-pitched alarm pierced through the cacophony of rain and thunder. Thomas's heart sank as he recognized the sound, an alert indicating that water levels were nearing the dam's critical threshold. Adrenaline surged through him, sharpening his senses as he turned to the monitors and watched the red indicators flashing ominously. "Water level at 98% and rising," a technician shouted over the din, urgency clear in his voice. Thomas could feel the weight of impending disaster settle heavily on his shoulders. Every instinct told him that time was slipping away. They were on the precipice of catastrophe and he had to act fast. "Deploy all available personnel at the floodgates," he commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. The team sprang into action, moving with synchronized efficiency honed through countless drills. Thomas carefully calculated their movements even as his mind raced with scenarios of what could happen if they didn't manage to mitigate the deluge that threatened their very existence. The alarm continued to blare, a relentless reminder of their dire situation. Outside, torrents of rain pounded like an angry fist against steel and concrete, each drop adding to the pressure building in his chest. He felt a familiar wave of fear creep back in, memories of days spent preparing for this very moment. Yet this time was different. They were not merely fighting against nature but standing directly in its path. Thomas positioned himself at his station, his gaze locked on the digital readouts. He could hear his team communicating frantically, calculations being made, shifts being delegated, but all he could think about was how everything rested on their shoulders as much as it did on his own. With every tick of the clock echoing in his mind, he steeled himself for what lay ahead. The dam had weathered storms before, but this was an unyielding force demanding every ounce of courage and expertise they possessed. As the alarm continued to pierce the chaos of the storm, Thomas's mind drifted momentarily from the immediate crisis to the local legend of the Hydra, a mythical creature said to inhabit the very waters threatening their dam. In folklore, the Hydra was a representation of overwhelming chaos, a beast that could regenerate with each blow, symbolizing nature's relentless and unpredictable wrath. The stories, often told around campfires in the valley, served as both cautionary tales and symbols of resilience. In those tales, the Hydra never truly died, it merely adapted and grew stronger with adversity. Thomas couldn't help but draw parallels between the legend and the storm that now raged outside. The rain, much like the Hydra, was relentless. Each drop seemed to multiply into a torrent that threatened to engulf everything in its path. The very land he had committed to protect felt alive with a powerful force that he couldn't control, no matter how skilled or prepared he thought he was. As he surveyed the rising water levels on the monitors, he imagined them transforming into something monstrous, an uncontrollable flood that would breach the dam with terrifying speed. Would they become victims of their own hubris, underestimating what lay beyond the gates? The tales of the Hydra echoed in his mind, reminding him that nature could not be tamed but only respected. "Stay focused," he shouted to his team, shaking off the unsettling thoughts. As much as he feared becoming part of that legend himself, he knew they could not let fear paralyze them. Together, they needed to confront this chaos head-on, to wield their knowledge and expertise like swords against the encroaching darkness. The dam may be their barrier against nature, but it was also a testament to their resilience, an act of defiance against the Hydra that threatened their very existence. With renewed resolve, Thomas steeled himself for the battle ahead. As the storm raged on, Thomas knew the time had come to activate evacuation protocols. He quickly reached for the radio, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "This is Thomas Mitchell at the dam. We need to initiate evacuation procedures for the surrounding areas immediately. The rising water levels are approaching critical status." His words echoed through his earpiece as he coordinated with local authorities, issuing directives and receiving updates in real time. He could already hear the distant wail of sirens. Emergency services were mobilizing in response to his alerts. Every second felt like an eternity as he battled against time, knowing that people's lives depended on swift action. "Communicate with the neighborhoods closest to the river," he instructed a team member who nodded and began relaying messages through a public announcement system. Thomas's mind raced as he thought of families hurriedly packing their belongings, children clinging to their parents amidst chaos. He hoped they were listening and taking it seriously. Denial often clouded judgment in dire situations. The rain continued its relentless assault, transforming familiar roads into rivers of brown water that surged ominously toward homes. Thomas felt a pang of anxiety at the thought of anyone being unprepared. "We must ensure everyone has enough time to evacuate," he reminded himself, pushing aside his fears to focus on practical solutions. He reached out to neighboring towns as well, ensuring they were aware of potential downstream flooding and coordinating shelter for evacuees once they made it out. With each conversation, he felt both empowered by his role and haunted by what might happen if they failed. As time slipped away, Thomas glanced at the monitors displaying rising water levels that continued their relentless climb. The Hydra was drawing closer, every moment counted in this race against nature's fury. The weight of responsibility settled on him once more. He was not just a dam operator tonight but a guardian for those who called this valley home. As the hours wore on and the storm raged with ferocity, the landscape transformed into a surreal tableau of both beauty and terror. The valley, once a familiar vista of rolling hills and serene waters, now presented a chaotic scene rife with danger. Water surged rapidly through fields that had previously bloomed with wildflowers. Vivid greens and yellows faded into muddy browns as torrents overwhelmed the land. In the dim light cast by flickering street lamps, gusts of wind whipped rain in horizontal sheets that seemed to dance madly across the earth. The once serene river that meandered gracefully through the valley was unrecognizable, its banks obliterated as it swelled and roared like a restless beast. Thomas watched through the thick glass of the control room, his heart pounding as he absorbed the magnitude of nature's fury. Amidst this chaos, reflections glimmered eerily on the surface of swirling waters like mirrors holding echoes of past joys and tranquility now drowned beneath chaos. Trees bent mercilessly under the weight of rain, their roots grasping desperately for purchase in soil that gave way to saturated misery. Yet even in this tempestuous awakening there was an undeniable beauty, the way droplets coalesced to form rivers down leaves like shimmering jewels fleeing toward their inevitable descent into darkness. Outside, shadows twisted into monstrous forms with each flash of lightning illuminating deepening floods, the Hydra rising from its slumber. It was no longer just a legend, it felt like a living force awakening with every inch gained against familiar terrain. Thomas understood this moment. He was witnessing nature reclaiming its power, raw and untamed. With urgency pulsing through his veins, he reminded himself that they were not just at the mercy of this mythical beast, they were guardians standing firm against its rise. Together with his team, they would face this monstrous tide head-on. They would embody resilience against the chaos while actively battling to restore balance before it consumed them all. The atmosphere in the control room had reached a fever pitch as Thomas kept his eyes glued to the rapidly fluctuating gauges. Suddenly, without warning, a sickening crack filled the air, a sound that reverberated through the walls of the dam like a thunderous heartbeat. He turned just in time to see water erupting over the top of one section, cascading down with ferocious power. His stomach dropped. They had always prepared for this moment, but preparation felt thin against reality. Water breach at Sector 4, a voice screamed over the din of alarms. Panic erupted around him as team members rushed to their stations, their faces pale but determined. Thomas felt the full weight of responsibility press down on him like an anchor. Lives were at stake, and he had to think fast. He faced an agonizing decision: activate additional floodgates and release even more water downstream, potentially endangering lives in areas already struggling with flooding, or risk keeping it under control and allowing more water to build, which could lead to catastrophic failure. Each second felt like an eternity as he calculated outcomes in his mind amid the chaotic noise surrounding him. Open Floodgate 3, now, he ordered, his voice strong despite the turmoil within him. A part of him screamed against it, imagining families along the river who might be caught in the surge, but from what he could see on the monitors, every moment spent deliberating was one closer to disaster here. Outside, torrents of water poured over barriers that once held firm against nature's fury. Thomas could almost see shadows moving beyond the dam. Those were not just trees now, but lives depending on their actions at this critical moment. As additional floodgates swung open with a heavy metallic groan, he steeled himself for what was next. He would have to trust his training and his team. They were all guardians tonight, and they would either stand together or fall as one under this Hydra unleashed by nature's chaos. Driven by purpose and growing desperation, they resolved to fight against this tide of destruction with everything they had left. The tension in the control room escalated as Thomas watched the floodgates open, releasing torrents of water downstream. He felt a deep gnawing in his gut, realizing the decision he had just made would have dire consequences for those living along the river. The faces of families flashed in his mind, children laughing, parents making memories in what was now a path of potential destruction. The weight of his choice bore heavily on him, but in that moment he knew it was necessary to protect the dam and prevent an even greater catastrophe. Floodgate 3 is fully operational, a technician reported, but Thomas's heart was elsewhere, thinking of what lay ahead. He couldn't shake the feeling that his actions could lead to loss of life downstream. Yet, keeping all the water trapped would spell doom for the dam itself and endanger even more lives in the valley. He glanced at his team, who were working feverishly at their posts, fear and determination etched on their faces. They were all in this together, every one of them shared the burden of this choice. "Stay sharp," he shouted, trying to instill confidence amidst the chaos. "We're not done yet." Outside, the storm raged with increasingly frenetic energy, and even as they released water downstream, flooding surged ominously around them. Thomas could feel the dam straining against nature's relentless onslaught, a stark reminder that every structure has its limits. As he monitored both gauges and radios, a chilling realization crept into his thoughts. This decision was just the beginning of a difficult battle. They would be fighting an enemy that did not yield, one that demanded sacrifice for the sake of safety. In that moment of crisis, Thomas understood what it meant to be a protector. Heroism was not always about grand gestures, sometimes it was about making gut-wrenching choices to save others. This night would etch itself into history not just for its destruction, but for the courage displayed by those who stood firm against nature's fury. He resolved then and there that whatever came next, they would face it together, sacrifices made for the greater good, and they would not falter in their resolve. The dawn broke reluctantly over the valley, revealing the aftermath of the storm, a landscape forever altered by nature's relentless power. Thomas stepped outside, his heart heavy with the collective burden of what had transpired. The once vibrant fields were now a murky expanse of debris and silt where wildflowers had blossomed mere days before. Homes that had stood for generations bore scars of flooding, their foundations eroded and walls dampened by the unforgiving waters. As he walked through the community, he encountered residents surveying the damage, their faces a mix of shock and resilience. They shared stories of harrowing escapes, children clinging to parents as water surged into their homes. Thomas listened as neighbors comforted one another, recounting how they had helped each other evacuate in those frantic hours before the flood. Yet amidst the destruction, there were glimmers of hope. Volunteers arrived with supplies, food, water, and blankets ready to assist those in need. People began to gather at designated shelters, helping each other find solace in shared experiences. The spirit of unity and determination shone through adversity. There was a palpable sense that they would rebuild together. In quiet moments, Thomas reflected on the choices made during the crisis, the sacrifices that ultimately saved lives at a cost. He couldn't dismiss the guilt that lingered in his heart for the families facing loss downstream due to his decision to open the floodgates. But he also recognized that their actions had prevented far greater devastation within the valley. As days turned to weeks and recovery efforts intensified, Thomas witnessed not only physical rebuilding but a rekindling of community bonds forged in adversity. Conversations shifted from tragedy to resilience, plans were laid for stronger flood defenses and improved emergency protocols. While nature had tested them harshly, it also revealed their strength as guardians, not just of the dam but of each other. Together, they would rise from this catastrophe with renewed purpose, reminding one another that hope could flourish even in the aftermath of chaos. As the valley began to heal from the scars of the flood, Thomas found solace in the lessons learned amid the chaos. The legend of the Hydra had served as a powerful reminder of nature's unpredictable might, a force that could be both beautiful and terrifically destructive. The recent storm illustrated not only the physical challenges they faced as a community but also highlighted an essential truth: respect for nature was paramount. In discussions with residents, Thomas listened intently as they spoke about their experiences during the flood. "We thought we could tame it," one neighbor admitted, "but nature doesn't work that way." These conversations echoed his own realizations. While humans could build dams and create infrastructure, they remained vulnerable to the immense power of storms, much like the mythical Hydra's ability to regenerate after each attack. Through community meetings, Thomas saw determination take root. Plans to strengthen flood defenses were drawn up alongside strategies for better emergency preparedness. They would not just rebuild what had been lost, they would innovate and adapt, applying lessons learned from both triumph and tragedy. This collective resilience forged new pathways for future cooperation among neighbors who once thought of themselves as isolated entities. The valley would emerge from this catastrophe transformed, not just by destruction but by unity. As he walked along what remained of familiar trails, now altered by water's relentless push, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were guardians of their environment and each other, recognizing that to truly coexist with nature required humility and vigilance. Standing at the edge of a river still swollen with remnants of rainwater, Thomas made a silent vow to honor those affected by this disaster through action and awareness, steering clear of complacency in the face of nature's fury. The Hydra had tested them all, but it had also woven their lives together in ways that would inspire vigilance against future storms. Together, they would strive not only for survival but for harmony within their landscape, an unbreakable bond forged through adversity and mutual respect.